Thank you for having me. We're trying a new remote today, Sterling and I. So I was going to explain it all in excruciating detail, but I don't think you'd find it very interesting. As a computer person, I think it's really interesting. So last Saturday night, we had Shotsuki Hoyo at OCBC. We have a regularly scheduled monthly memorial for families who've had loved ones pass away in that month. And we used to have it from 7:30 to 8:30, but we moved it to 4:30 to 5:30 so people could eat dinner after instead of before. And also, it means that I can go to a show once in a while. So I've gone to this show before, but this is a Christmas Carol, a really, really famous story by Charles Dickens. I think he wrote it, we'll find out, but I think like in 1843 he wrote this, and it's been redone and redone and redone for, I'm not going to do the math now, but like well over 150 years. Maybe we're coming up on 175 years of the importance of this story. And it's a story of the human condition. So it's not literally true, it's not historically true, but it's trying to communicate a profound emotional truth. And you can understand this story in a lot of different levels. You could take it as a literal story. You could, but I wouldn't. And then the other thing is, it's a profound spiritual story. And the thing I wanted to mention is it's set at Christmas time, but it's not a Christmas story, per se. So there's a big debate on the internet, whether the movie Die Hard with Bruce Willis. That is set on Christmas Eve, I think, at an office party. But it's not a Christmas story. And a lot of people on the internet have this argument. That's the setting, right? It's the backdrop. It's the staging. Christmas is a good time to tell the story because there's a lot going on and there's lights and it's exciting and it's a nice setting. It's a nice state for staging, but it's not a Christmas story per se. So this was the 40 years Hal Landon has performed as Ebeneezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol at the South Coast Repertory Theater in Costa Mesa. So 40 years he's been doing this. So I think since 1979, right? And maybe he started when he was 30 with a lot of makeup. And now at 70, he doesn't need any makeup. He just walked out. And he's wearing this red scarf. And when we went to see this a couple years ago, everybody in the audience had a red scarf on, and I didn't really understand what was going on, but it's a plot point. Fred, his nephew, gives him a gift, and it turns out to be a red scarf. And he finally opens the gift at the end of the show and puts it on, so everybody wears red scarves in the audience to the performance. So I put on my red scarf last Saturday, and we went to South Coast Repertory Theater. And the only thing that happened kind of bad, I'll tell you this real quick, I have a bad sense of direction. And people think it's just a cute little thing I make up, or it's just like an anecdote or something. But when I was young at the Del Amo Mall, I parked my car and I went on the first floor, and then I didn't realize it, but I went upstairs, and I came out, and I was still on street level, and I couldn't find my car. But I guess it's on a hill. But when you go outside, it looks like it's all flat. And I couldn't understand, how can you go in on the first floor from street level, go up the escalator, and then come out at street level again? I find that very disorienting. So I parked my car over at South Coast Plaza by Bodine's, and we ate. And then we went upstairs to get coffee at Starbucks. And then we left out by Forever 21. This probably doesn't mean anything to you. We're down Forever 21, and we take the bridge over to the theater. And when the theater got out, when we were done, I came back. And the other thing I do is if I turn right to go somewhere, when I come back, I turn right again. But you have to reverse everything. So I got off the bridge, and I turned right instead of left. And I was up a level. I couldn't find my car. And I was beeping every black car. And I was freaking out. I almost called the police. And I'm like, where's my car? And Teague was like, oh my. And then I'm like, where's Bodine's? And then Teague was like, you're on the next level. So anyway, that was a disaster. So anyway, this was a fantastic performance, standing ovations all around. And the interesting thing is I did that Dharma talk on Keanu Reeves here a couple weeks ago. Hal Landon, I found out, was in, he was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with Keanu Reeves. I mentioned that movie Keanu did. He was also in The Bogus Journey in 1991, and the third in the trilogy, Face the Music. He's going to be in that too. So it all my talks they all fit together. So I wanted to show you, this is my most famous version. I was 20, so he wrote it in 1843. This version came out in 1984, and this is George C. Scott. I gave this talk to a bunch of high school kids. They never heard of Bruce Willis. They never heard of Die Hard. They never heard of George C. Scott. So, he won, I think, the Academy Award, maybe for Patton. So this was kind of weird that they got George C. Scott to play Ebeneezer Scrooge. But I thought his performance was outstanding. And what's neat about this story is Ebeneezer Scrooge goes on this spiritual journey. He goes from being the worst person ever, and through self-reflection, realizes awakening Christmas morning. And so this is kind of the Buddhist idea of insight. He self-reflects, he becomes self-aware, and within 1 8-hour period, he completely turns his life around. And from a Christian point of view, it kind of doesn't make sense. The story bothered me a little bit because there's no moral or ethical basis for this transformation. But he transcends his karma. And once he understands why he's so angry, that awareness changes his behavior. And so the other thing is this is a trick question somebody told me. They said I almost got this wrong. 3 ghosts from Christmas come, but actually 4 ghosts visit him. It's a trick question. So Marley, his business partner, comes to visit him and says, you're building this long chain that you'll have to carry for eternity based on your bad actions. But you could undo that if you turn your life around. And then he has a visitation from 3 ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future. And you could take it literally, that these are angels or spirits, but Dickens does something very interesting. There's an establishing shot. Ebeneezer is a miser, and he's eating stale, bad porridge that had gone bad, milk and cream, and he eats that. And when he goes to bed, he says something about his stomach hurting. So this is the pickle theory of dreaming. There's a theory that if you have an upset stomach, you dream more. And your dreams are your subconscious trying to work things out. So that's the way I look at it. So we're going to see, I want to go through the characters real quick. Ebeneezer Scrooge has a sister named Fan, and she died young, and he loved her dearly. And she was married and had a son named Fred. So Fred is Ebenezer's nephew, his beloved sister's son. And Fan and Ebeneezer loved each other dearly, but their mother died young, I think, and the father was abusive to Ebeneezer. He was really nice to the daughter, but he was abusive to Ebeneezer. And so for some reason, Ebeneezer hates Fred. I mean, this is weird, right? It'd be like if your grandfather hated your granddaughter. Or how could an uncle hate a nephew? It's very odd. He can't stand Fred. And also in this is Bob Cratchit, who's the father of Tiny Tim. And I asked the kids what the name was of that little boy, and they all yelled out, Little Timmy. I said, close. It's not Little Timmy. It's Tiny Tim. So this is Fred inviting Ebeneezer every year to come to Christmas Eve dinner.
Merry Christmas, Bob Cratchit.
And the same to you, Mr. Fred.
Merry Christmas, Uncle. I said, Merry Christmas, Uncle. Humbug. Christmas a humbug, Uncle. Surely you don't mean that.
I do. What's Christmas but a time for buying things for which you have no need, no money? Time for finding yourself a year older, not an hour richer. If If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Come now.
Neville, you keep Christmas in your way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone, then. Much good it may do you, much good it has done you.
There are a great many things from which I might have derived good, from which I have not profited, I dare say. Christmas among the rest. But I've always thought of Christmas time when it comes round as a good time, a kindly, forgiving, charitable time. A time when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely to their fellow creatures. And so Uncle Bert has never put a scrap of gold or silver into my pocket. I do believe that it has done me good. And I say, God bless it.
So that's Bob Cratchit on the verge of being fired. So if you listen to this real closely, I listened to it over and over again. Everything to Scrooge is a financial transaction. He measures everything based on money. So Christmas costs money. Christmas parties cost money. We're not making money. We're not working. So everything to him is financial. And a little bit like Darth Vader, I think because Ebeneezer Scrooge had such a difficult childhood, he tries to control everything. I think he thinks if he collects enough money, nothing bad can happen to him, and that he will be in control. So this is like, it's a way he feels safe, is to generate revenue. So this is his coping skill. And then the other thing that Dickens does really well is there's a really strong political undertone to this story. He could have written an editorial, and maybe the people that agreed with him would read it, the people that didn't agree with him would scoff at it. But so he buries this political message deep inside this story of the elites. There's a very strong class hierarchy in England, and the Industrial Revolution was really good for a lot of people, but it was really bad for the poor, the working poor. And so, he feels like he pays his taxes, and that's enough. And if people don't want to work, then don't work. And if you starve because you don't have a job, then starve. And he says that maybe if some of these people would just die, it would really help with the homeless problem, because we wouldn't have so many surplus population cluttering the streets. And so, he's really making a strong political commentary on this type of thinking. So he goes to his club at night to eat dinner, and these two gentlemen ask him to donate money to the poor. And he basically says, he's just incredibly cruel and evil. And there's not a shred of light within him.
You don't know us.
Nor do I wish to.
My name is Poole, and this is Mr. Hatley.
Excellent. Now, if you'll allow me to pass.
Let me explain something. At this festive season of the year, it seems desirable that those of us with means should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this time.
Provision. Are you seeking money from me then?
Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts.
Are there prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
The workhouses, they're still in operation.
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill, the poorhouses, still in full vigor?
All very busy, sir.
I was afraid from what you said that something had stopped them in full force.
A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and food and warmth.
What can we put you down for, sir?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. My taxes help to support the public institutions which I have mentioned, and they cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, perhaps they had better do so, and decrease the surplus population.
Surely you don't mean that, sir.
With all my heart. Now, if you will go about your business, gentlemen, and allow me to go about mine.
So this quote about letting the surplus population die is used against him in the next scene. So the empty seat has to do with Tiny Tim, not Little Timmy, So this is Tiny Tim on the right, and the tall guy on the left is the Ghost of Christmas Present. And I mean, if you're my age, you'll remember. Fred is Roger Reese. He was on Cheers. No? And this tall guy is Ed Woodward, and he was in Breaker Morantz, the movie, with Mel Gibson, I think. And he was also in The Equalizer. It was a cool TV show where he would go and, like, he had a P.O. box, and if you were in trouble, you could send him a letter. And you could say, my landlord is raising my rent, and he's turning it into a condominium, and he's throwing us out. And he would come and save you. So they redid that with Denzel Washington. That's where that came from. See, if you were in my generation, this would be so important. So I wanted to talk about compassion a little bit. There's two things in this scene. One is the Ghost of Christmas Present uses Ebenezer's words against him in a very harsh way. He cuts him to the core. He really uses harsh language, but it's to awaken him. It's to have him realize insight. So in Buddhism, that's compassion. It's not being nice. It's insight in action. So he's going to talk very harsh to Ebenezer, but he gets through to him, and he helps wake him up to his anger and hatred. And then the other thing is the Ghost of Christmas Present talks about shadows. The shadows are indicating that Tiny Tim will die. And you could think of this as causes and conditions or karma. So, you know, the causes and conditions are pointing towards his death unless he gets medical help.
Tell me, Spirit, will he live?
I see a vacant place at this table. I see a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, save despair.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my species will find him here. But if he is to die, then let him die, and decrease the surplus population.
You use my own words against me.
So perhaps in the future you will hold your tongue until you have discovered what the surplus population is and where it is. It may well be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child.
So, you know, you could argue that the teacher says what the student needs to hear. He needs to hear that. It's not kind, it's not sweet, but it's compassionate in the Buddhist context. So I used to have this entitled The Enlightenment, but this kind of has the connotation of the Enlightenment in Europe and the Renaissance when we became more scientific and more rational. So I think we tend to use the word awakening for insight. But Dickens does a really neat thing here. There's like parallel structure stuff going on. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but it's almost like, you know, these stories are storyboarded. I mean, Dickens is placing things in the scene for the next scene, and this is all mapped out. And I think the Buddhist sutras are like that. All this stuff is placed for a specific reason for the arc of the story. So Ebenezer wakes up after this one night at 9 a.m. on Christmas morning, and he's not only literally awake, but he's figuratively, spiritually awakened as well. So there's kind of a double entendre there. There's kind of a pun or parallel structure that he's awakening from his sleep, both spiritually and literally. So now, what's so great about George C. Scott is he's gone from the worst person in the world, now he smiles, and he's full of warmth, and to be able to turn that switch as an actor, I think is amazing.
Daylight. But what day? Hello, you there, boy.
Me, sir?
Yes, you, my good fellow. What day is today?
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day, of course.
Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits did it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like, of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello?
Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, on the corner?
I should hope I did.
Intelligent boy, remarkable boy. Do you know if they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there?
What, the one as big as me?
Delightful boy. Pleasure talking to you. Yes, the one as big as you.
It's hanging there now.
Well, go and buy it. Yes, go and buy it and bring them round so that I may tell them where to deliver it. Come back with the man, I'll give you a shilling. Come back in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. I must dress myself. So much to do. I don't want to lose any time. I was liked. I was happy as an angel. I was made as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Merry Christmas to everybody, and a Happy New Year to the world!
So, he's transcended his karma, right? So his dad was still mean to him. His mother still died young. His sister still died young. And he did all the things he did incorrectly for the past 40 years. But, insight is sudden. Awakening is sudden. So he suddenly turns his life around just through insight alone. The other thing, Reverend Rada did a class that we called Become Happy. And it's a little bit of a pun. But people are having trouble with the comments about the word happy because it sounds a little superficial. So there's a secular happiness, but he's kind of attained a spiritual happiness, one of deep contentment. So it's a little bit of a play on words. There's a different kind of happiness, one that transcends material happiness. The other thing I thought was really interesting about this is he actually likes children now, right? Like the old Ebeneezer, I would keep children. They would irritate him so much more than adults. And he even loves children. The other thing I wanted to mention is we don't know yet, and don't blurt it out, don't ruin my punchline. We still don't know yet why Ebeneezer hates Fred. And I hope you will stay tuned for the adult study class. Okay? So this has all just been a tease for the adult study class. So I don't think Buddhism was beginning to... Britons in England in the 1840s and 1850s were beginning to become aware of Buddhism to some extent. Philosophers and writers. I don't know. Maybe Dickens has heard a little bit about Buddhism, but I doubt it. So this is these memes or this theme or narrative exists in Western culture, but it's just not as emphasized as this idea that you become good and happy through moral and ethical training and discipline. So, this story is somewhat unique in our culture, but it really represents a universal truth that is emphasized in Buddhism, that this is how one can realize happiness, not through achievements or through promotions. There's another path, and it's one that transcends the external circumstances of your life. You're grounded. It's a timeless happiness. And so I like to use this as an example or an archetype. And you can explain this to new people better through watching a film than going through a philosophical discussion of non-self and impermanence and interconnectedness. And, there is a lot of that in Buddhism. But in the Pure Land tradition, we kind of communicate the teachings in this visual, emotional, very human way so that anyone can understand and appreciate the spiritual depth of the story without being able to read Chinese. So this is kind of in our wheelhouse. So it's very visual, it's very effective, it touches your heart, and you kind of get it in an intuitive way. You may not be able to explain it in words, but you understand it. It touches you. And that's what Dickens and great artists do. And I think our sutras can be read in the same way. They're trying to communicate a feeling to you, something that you kind of absorb and live effortlessly. So please join me in Gassho. Namo Amitabha Butsu. Naman Doubts. Naman Doubts. Naman Doubts. Thank you.